The Nevada desert holds its secrets close, wrapped in endless stretches of sand and silence. Here, where the horizon bleeds into infinity and the sun bakes the earth to powder, began one of the most extraordinary claims of the modern age. Dr. Robert Scott Lazar lived an unremarkable life until he didn't. Born in the winter of 1959, he grew up tinkering with engines and electronics in the humid warmth of Florida. His hands were always stained with grease or chemical residue, his mind always racing toward the next mechanical puzzle. By his 20s, Lazar had drifted westward like so many dreamers before him, landing in the neon glow of Las Vegas. The city's appetite for spectacle, an illusion, would prove fitting for what was to come. He claimed employment at Los Alamos National Laboratory, working on classified defense projects. The details remained murky, buried in bureaucratic files that seemed to vanish when scrutinized too closely. Then came 1989, the year everything changed. On a quiet Tuesday evening, a figure appeared on local television, his face obscured by shadow, his voice electronically altered. He called himself Dennis. What he said next would echo through decades of UFO lore and government denials. He spoke of a place called S4, a facility so classified it didn't officially exist, hidden in the mountains south of the notorious Area 51. This base allegedly housed the impossible 9 spacecraft of extraterrestrial origin, not crash debris or fragments, but complete, functioning vehicles from somewhere beyond Earth's atmosphere. Dennis claimed he had been recruited to study these craft, to unlock the secrets of their propulsion systems. His job was reverse engineering on an unimaginable scale, attempting to understand technology that defied every principle of conventional physics. The propulsion method, he explained with startling technical precision, relied on manipulating gravity itself. The craft used an exotic material he called Element 115, a substance that existed only in theory on Earth's periodic table. This element allegedly generated gravitational waves, bending the fabric of space-time and allowing instantaneous movement across vast distances. To skeptics, it sounded like science fiction, but Dennis spoke with the measured cadence of an engineer, not the breathless excitement of a fantasist. He described security protocols, facility layouts, and technical specifications with uncomfortable accuracy. He even mentioned biometric scanning devices that wouldn't become common for another decade. When the broadcast ended, the man behind the alias made a choice that would define the rest of his life. Robert Lazar stepped out of the shadows and revealed his identity. The quiet physicist became the most controversial whistleblower in UFO history. Immediately, investigators began dissecting his background. His educational credentials couldn't be verified. MIT and Caltech had no record of his attendance. His employment history at Los Alamos showed gaps and inconsistencies. Lazar claimed this erasure was deliberate, part of a campaign to destroy his credibility before he could speak further. The truth became impossible to separate from the cover-up. Had his records been scrubbed, or had they never existed? Was he a brilliant scientist silenced by shadowy forces, or an elaborate hoaxer with just enough technical knowledge to be convincing? What remained undeniable was the detail of his testimony. He described S4 with architectural precision, hangars carved into mountainsides, massive doors disguised as natural rock faces, security measures that seemed both paranoid and necessary. The craft he worked on, which he nicknamed the Sport Model, was described as seamless and metallic, with a surface that seemed to bend light itself. According to the briefing materials he claimed to have read, these visitors came from Zeta Reticuli, a binary star system 39 light-years from Earth. the document suggested. Contact had been ongoing since the late 1940s, hidden beneath layers of classification and compartmentalization. As Lazar's story spread, it ignited imaginations and skeptical investigations in equal measure. Area 51, previously known only to military insiders and aviation enthusiasts, became a household name. The desert facility transformed from a classified testing ground into the epicenter of alien conspiracy theories. Whether truth or fiction, Lazar's emergence marked a turning point. He had opened a door that could never be fully closed, introducing concepts and possibilities that would haunt the public consciousness for generations to come. Chapter 2. Inside the Impossible. The journey to S4 was like crossing into another reality. According to Lazar's account, after intensive background checks and psychological evaluations, selected personnel were transported in windowless vehicles along unmarked desert roads. The route was kept secret through deliberately obscured travel, ensuring that even those who worked there couldn't easily find their way back. Lazar described his first glimpse of the facility with the wonder of someone witnessing the impossible made manifest. The hangars were masterpieces of camouflage, carved directly into the mountain faces and disguised so perfectly they appeared to be natural rock formations. Only when massive doors slid open with hydraulic precision did the deception reveal itself. Inside waited the 9 craft, each unique in design, yet sharing certain unmistakable characteristics. Some resembled the classic flying saucers of popular imagination, while others displayed more angular, organic geometries that seemed to follow design principles unknown to human engineering. They sat in their individual bays like sleeping giants, silent and still. The sport model became Lazar's focus and obsession. Standing roughly 30 feet in diameter, it possessed an almost liquid metallic surface that seemed to shimmer with its own internal light. No visible seams, welds, or fasteners marked its construction. It appeared to have been formed rather than built, as if shaped by forces that could manipulate matter at the molecular level. When Lazar was first permitted to approach the craft, he reached out with scientific curiosity and human wonder. The surface felt impossibly smooth and cool, like touching liquid mercury that had somehow solidified. The metal seemed lighter than it should be, as if it existed partially outside normal space-time. The interior revealed even stranger characteristics. Everything was scaled for beings smaller than humans, perhaps 3 to 4 feet in height. The ceiling curved low overhead, and the few visible surfaces suggested occupants of different proportions and needs. There were no recognizable controls, no instrument panels, no visible technology in any conventional sense. At the craft center stood a single column extending from floor to ceiling. This, Lazar was told, housed the reactor that powered the entire propulsion system. 3 gravity amplifiers, positioned in a triangular configuration beneath the craft's floor, generated the gravitational waves that enabled movement. The physics, as Lazar understood it, was revolutionary. Rather than pushing against air or expelling mass for thrust, the craft created gravitational distortions in space-time itself. It would compress space ahead of its intended direction of travel while expanding space behind, effectively allowing the craft to fall through folded space. This method of propulsion produced no exhaust, no sonic booms, no heat signature. The craft moved in complete silence, gliding through the air with fluid grace that defied conventional understanding of aerodynamics and inertia. The power source for this impossible technology was element 115, stable in its alien form despite being unknown and unsynthesized on Earth. when bombarded with protons in the reactor. This exotic matter allegedly released tremendous amounts of energy while generating the gravitational effects that made faster-than-light travel possible. Lazar's team worked under strict compartmentalization protocols. Each scientist focused on a narrow aspect of the technology, forbidden from communicating with colleagues studying other components. This isolation was designed to prevent any single individual from understanding the complete picture, making it nearly impossible to replicate or fully comprehend the alien engineering. The atmosphere at S4 was one of controlled paranoia. Armed guards monitored every corridor and conversation. Personnel were constantly reminded of their security obligations and the severe consequences of any breach. The message was clear. What happened at S4 stayed at S4, permanently and without exception. During his tenure, Lazar witnessed flight tests that shattered his understanding of physics. The sport model would lift off with perfect silence, hover motionless, then accelerate in directions that should have torn the craft apart. It moved like a fish through water, responding to forces and following trajectories that conventional aircraft could never achieve. Watching these demonstrations, Lazar realized he wasn't studying captured enemy technology or advanced human engineering. This was something genuinely alien, representing scientific principles and capabilities that human civilization wouldn't achieve for centuries, if ever. Chapter 3. The Desert Witnesses. Weight of what he had seen at S4 began to consume Robert Lazar. The compartmentalization that protected the project's secrets also isolated him from anyone who might understand or believe his experiences. He carried the burden of impossible knowledge, unable to share it with colleagues, friends, or even his wife. Paranoia crept into his daily life. He noticed helicopters lingering over his neighborhood, unfamiliar vehicles parked near his home, and subtle signs that his communications were being monitored. The boundaries between his classified work and personal life blurred as surveillance extended beyond the facility's gates. Driven by a combination of fear and moral obligation, Lazar made a decision that would change everything. He decided to bring witnesses to the desert, violating every protocol and risking everything he had worked to achieve. One crisp Wednesday evening, he gathered a small group of trusted friends, including physicist Gene Huff and his wife Carol. He chose Wednesday nights deliberately, based on his knowledge of S4's flight testing schedule. These midweek tests occurred under cover of darkness, when civilian air traffic was minimal and prying eyes were few. They drove into the vast emptiness of the Nevada test site, parking on a ridge overlooking the restricted area around Papoose Lake. Armed with video cameras, binoculars, and telescopes, they settled in to wait. The desert night was profound in its silence, broken only by distant coyote calls and the whisper of wind across sand. Then, as if summoned by Lazar's predictions, it appeared. A bright point of light rose from behind the mountains, moving with impossible grace and speed. It hovered motionless for long moments, then darted at angles that defied physics, accelerating without apparent effort or concern for inertia. The light would disappear, then reappear in completely different locations, as if teleporting across the sky. The witnesses filmed what they could, their shaky footage capturing small lights against the infinite darkness. For them, the grainy images were less important than the experience itself. They had seen something that challenged every assumption about what was possible, something that validated Lazar's incredible claims. Emboldened by success, they returned the following week, then again. Each expedition yielded similar sightings, building confidence that they had discovered something genuinely extraordinary. But their activities hadn't gone unnoticed. On their final trip, the group found themselves surrounded by armed security personnel who emerged from the darkness like phantoms. Military vehicles appeared with coordinated precision, suggesting long-term surveillance of their activities. Names were recorded, equipment confiscated, and stern warnings delivered about the consequences of trespassing on restricted government property. For Lazar, the encounter marked the end of his involvement with S4. He was brought in for intense interrogation, confronted with transcripts of his personal phone calls and detailed records of his movements. The message was unmistakable. His every action had been monitored, his betrayal documented and understood. Officials made it clear that his security clearance was permanently revoked, and any further breaches would result in severe consequences. The nature of those consequences was left deliberately vague, allowing Lazar's imagination to fill in the terrible possibilities. Faced with this ultimatum, Lazar made another fateful choice. If the government intended to silence him through intimidation and threats, he would speak first and speak publicly. He reached out to investigative journalist George Knapp at Las Vegas television station KLAS, beginning a relationship that would thrust his story into international prominence. The decision to go public was both desperate and calculated. By making his claims known to the world, Lazar hoped to create a shield of publicity that would protect him from more direct forms of retaliation. If something happened to him after his revelations, the circumstances would be suspicious enough to validate his claims posthumously. Chapter 4: The Revelation. Class television station in Las Vegas had built its reputation on tackling unusual stories. But nothing could have prepared investigative journalist George Knapp for what Robert Lazar brought to his attention. When they first met in a quiet coffee shop away from prying eyes, Lazar's demeanor was that of a man carrying an almost unbearable secret. The initial interview required elaborate precautions. Lazar's face was obscured by shadows, his voice electronically altered to prevent identification. Using the alias Dennis, he began to unfold his story with methodical precision, describing S4 and its impossible contents in technical detail that was either completely fabricated or disturbingly authentic. Knapp, a seasoned journalist accustomed to outlandish claims, found himself increasingly convinced by Lazar's presentation. The physicist spoke with the measured cadence of someone recounting observed facts rather than invented fantasies. His descriptions included technical specifications, security protocols, and operational procedures that demonstrated either extensive insider knowledge or remarkably sophisticated fabrication. When the first segment aired in May 1989, it created an immediate sensation. Viewers who had never heard of Area 51 or government UFO programs suddenly found themselves confronting the possibility that alien technology was being studied in secret facilities hidden in the Nevada desert. The response was explosive and polarized. UFO researchers hailed Lazar as the most credible whistleblower in the field's history, finally providing insider testimony about long-suspected government activities. Skeptics dismissed him as an elaborate hoax, pointing to the lack of verifiable credentials and the fantastic nature of his claims. Emboldened by the initial reaction and convinced that publicity offered his best protection, Lazar agreed to appear on camera without disguise. In subsequent interviews, he revealed his identity and expanded on his testimony, providing additional details about S4's operations and the alien technology housed there. His calm, matter-of-fact presentation style became his trademark. Rather than displaying the breathless excitement typical of UFO claimants, Lazar spoke with the resigned wariness of someone sharing uncomfortable truths. He readily admitted the limits of his knowledge, acknowledging that much of the technology remained beyond his comprehension. The interviews transformed Area 51 from an obscure military facility into a cultural phenomenon. The previously classified installation became synonymous with alien visitation and government cover-ups, inspiring countless books, movies, and conspiracy theories. Lazar had inadvertently created the modern mythology surrounding the site. As his story spread through media coverage and word of mouth, certain details began to gain unexpected validation. The hand scanner he described, dismissed as fantasy when first mentioned, was later confirmed to exist in classified facilities. Photographs emerged showing identical devices used for biometric identification in sensitive military installations. More significantly, his references to element 115 gained credibility when scientists successfully synthesized a substance in 2003, naming it moscovium, while the laboratory-created isotopes were highly unstable and decayed within milliseconds. The mere existence of the element lent unexpected support to Lazar's claims about its use in alien propulsion systems. These small confirmations didn't prove his story, but they demonstrated that some of his seemingly impossible assertions had basis in reality. For believers, they represented crucial validation. For skeptics, they were curious coincidences that didn't outweigh the lack of direct evidence. Lazar himself seemed ambivalent about the attention his revelations generated. He rarely sought additional publicity and often appeared reluctant in interviews, as if he regretted opening this particular door. When asked why he had chosen to speak publicly, he consistently emphasized duty over desire, claiming he felt obligated to share what he had learned regardless of the personal consequences. Chapter 5. The scrutiny intensifies with Robert Lazar's identity revealed and his claims circulating globally. Investigators began the systematic process of verifying or debunking his background. What they discovered was a portrait of a man whose past seemed deliberately obscured, whether by design or circumstance. The most damaging revelations concerned his educational credentials. Lazar claimed degrees from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology and the California Institute of Technology, arguably the two most prestigious technical universities in America. Yet extensive investigations found no records of his attendance at either institution. No transcripts, no graduation records, no student directories listing his name. University registrars confirmed they had no documentation of Lazar's enrollment or graduation. This absence of evidence struck many as impossible to explain through normal circumstances. Either Lazar had fabricated his educational background entirely, or his records had been systematically removed by parties unknown. Lazar maintained that his academic history had been deliberately erased as part of a broader campaign to destroy his credibility. He argued that the same forces responsible for maintaining S4's secrecy were now working to discredit him personally, using their influence to eliminate evidence of his qualifications. Employment records proved equally problematic. While investigators found some evidence of Lazar's work at Los Alamos National Laboratory, the details were inconsistent and fragmentary. A 1982 telephone directory listed him among the facility's personnel, and a local newspaper article featured him discussing particle accelerator research. These documents suggested he had been employed in some capacity, but not necessarily as the physicist he claimed to. Former colleagues at Los Alamos offered conflicting accounts of Lazar's role and capabilities. Some remembered him as a technician or contractor rather than a research scientist. Others questioned whether he possessed the advanced knowledge necessary for the work he claimed to have performed at S4. The inconsistencies in his background became ammunition for skeptics, who argued that Lazar was a low-level employee or contractor who had fabricated his credentials and invented his UFO story for attention or financial gain. They portrayed him as someone with just enough scientific knowledge to make his claims plausible to not, but lacking the genuine expertise he claimed to possess. Personal difficulties compounded these credibility issues. In 1990, Lazar was arrested for his involvement in a prostitution operation. Charges that had nothing to do with UFOs but severely damaged his public reputation. For many observers, the criminal charges provided further evidence that he was not the credible scientist he claimed to be. Supporters argued that these legal troubles were evidence of government harassment designed to destroy Lazar's character and credibility. They viewed his arrest as part of a coordinated campaign to discredit him, suggesting that authorities were willing to use any available means to undermine his testimony about S4. The debate over Lazar's background reflected deeper questions about the nature of evidence and credibility in extraordinary claims. His supporters pointed to the technical accuracy of many of his descriptions and his consistent refusal to profit from his story as evidence of authenticity. His detractors emphasized the lack of verifiable credentials and the implausibility of his claims as proof of fabrication. Throughout this intense scrutiny, Lazar himself remained remarkably consistent in his testimony. He never modified his story to address criticisms or accommodate new information. When confronted with evidence of discrepancies in his background, he maintained his original explanations without elaboration or revision. This consistency was interpreted differently by various observers. Supporters saw it as evidence of truthfulness, arguing that fabricated stories typically evolve and change under pressure. Skeptics viewed it as the rehearsed performance of a skilled deceiver, suggesting that Lazar had carefully crafted his narrative and was sticking to it regardless of contradictory evidence. Chapter 6: The Science of the Impossibles. Debate swelled around Robert Lazar's credibility and background. Attention turned to the scientific principles underlying his claims. Could the technology he described actually exist within the known laws of physics, or were his assertions purely fictional? The centerpiece of Lazar's account was the alien propulsion system, which allegedly manipulated gravity to achieve faster-than-light travel. According to his testimony, the craft used 3 gravity amplifiers positioned in a triangular configuration beneath the vehicle's floor. These devices generated directional gravitational fields that could compress space-time ahead of the craft while expanding it behind. This method of propulsion, Lazar explained, allowed the craft to fall through folded space rather than fighting against the resistance of conventional flight. The vehicle would create a gravitational gradient that pulled it forward, eliminating the need for reaction mass or energy-intensive acceleration. The result was silent, instantaneous movement that appeared to violate conservation of momentum and other fundamental principles. Mainstream physicists greeted these claims with profound skepticism. Gravity, they pointed out, was the weakest of the 4 fundamental forces and had never been successfully manipulated in any practical application. Creating artificial gravitational fields would require energy levels comparable to stellar masses, making Lazar's descriptions physically impossible with any conceivable technology. The power source for this impossible system was equally problematic. Element 115, as Lazar described it, was a stable, super-heavy element capable of producing tremendous energy through an unknown nuclear process. In 1989, this element existed only in theoretical predictions, representing a gap in the periodic table that scientists expected to be filled by highly unstable isotopes when researchers finally synthesized element 115 in 2003. Naming it moscovium, the results contradicted Lazar's claims. The laboratory-created isotopes decayed within milliseconds, far too unstable to serve as fuel for any practical application. The element's extreme instability made it useless. For the purposes Lazar had described, Lazar countered these objections by arguing that the alien version of element 115 was a different isotope than what human scientists had created. He suggested that this exotic matter existed in a stable configuration unknown on Earth, possibly manufactured through processes or conditions that human science hadn't yet discovered. Other aspects of his technical testimony proved more prescient. His detailed descriptions of biometric hand scanners, dismissed as fantasy in 1989, were later validated when photographs emerged showing identical devices in classified military facilities. The bone density measurement system he described was eventually confirmed to exist, though whether this represented insider knowledge or lucky guessing remained unclear. The gravitational lensing effects Lazar attributed to the alien craft also aligned with legitimate physics concepts. Einstein's general relativity predicted that massive objects would bend light and distort spacetime, effects that had been observed around black holes and galaxy clusters, while creating such distortions artificially remained impossible. The theoretical framework Lazar referenced was scientifically sound. Some researchers found intriguing parallels between Lazar's descriptions and emerging theories in theoretical physics. Concepts like Alcubierre drive mechanics, which proposed manipulating space-time for faster-than-light travel, bore striking resemblances to the propulsion system he had described years earlier. Whether this represented genuine foresight or retroactive interpretation remained hotly debated. The craft's flight characteristics, as Lazar described them, defied conventional aerodynamics but aligned with reports from military pilots who had encountered unidentified aerial phenomena. Objects that accelerated instantaneously, changed direction without deceleration, and moved silently through the atmosphere matched patterns that would later be documented in official government investigations. Despite these intriguing parallels, the scientific community remained largely unconvinced. The energy requirements for gravitational manipulation, the impossibility of stable, super-heavy elements, and the lack of direct evidence made Lazar's claims difficult to accept within established scientific frameworks. Chapter 7. Living with the Burden-Ass. The initial media frenzy surrounding his revelations subsided. Robert Lazar found himself in an impossible position. He had achieved his goal of making his story public, but the consequences proved more far-reaching and permanent than he had anticipated. The man who had sought to expose hidden truths found himself living as a perpetual outsider, neither fully accepted nor completely dismissed. The constant scrutiny took a profound toll on Lazar's personal life. Every aspect of his background was dissected and analyzed by investigators, journalists, and amateur researchers. His marriage suffered under the pressure of unwanted attention and persistent doubt about his truthfulness. Friends and colleagues were drawn into the controversy, forced to choose sides in a debate that had no clear resolution. Professional consequences proved equally severe. The scientific community, already skeptical of his claims, became increasingly hostile as questions about his credentials multiplied. Career opportunities in traditional physics research disappeared, and his reputation in academic circles was permanently damaged. The man who claimed to have worked on humanity's most advanced technology found himself effectively blacklisted from legitimate scientific employment. Lazar responded to these challenges by retreating from public life and establishing United Nuclear, a small company specializing in scientific equipment and supplies. The business allowed him to maintain connections to the scientific world while avoiding the institutional scrutiny that had made traditional employment impossible. It was a compromise that satisfied neither his critics nor his supporters, but provided him with relative peace and financial stability. The company's operations occasionally brought unwanted attention. Government agencies conducted periodic inspections and investigations, examining everything from chemical inventories to customer lists. Whether these represented routine regulatory oversight or continued harassment related to his UFO claims remained unclear, but they served as constant reminders that his past could never be completely buried. In rare interviews during this period, Lazar appeared worn down by the years of controversy and skepticism. The confident physicist who had first appeared on television had been replaced by a more cautious, guarded individual who seemed to regret the attention his revelations had generated. When asked if he would make the same choice again, his responses were often ambivalent, acknowledging both the importance of truth-telling and the personal cost of his decisions. His wife, Joy, described the ongoing stress of living under constant suspicion and surveillance. Phone conversations felt monitored, daily routines were disrupted by curious visitors, and the simple act of living normally became complicated by the persistent attention of believers and skeptics alike. The couple developed strategies for maintaining privacy and security that bordered on paranoia but seemed necessary given their circumstances, despite the personal costs. Lazar never recanted his story or claimed that his experiences at S4 had been imagined or fabricated. His consistency in the face of relentless criticism impressed some observers and frustrated others. Those who believed him saw his unwavering testimony as evidence of truthfulness. Those who didn't viewed it as stubborn adherence to a profitable lie. The isolation imposed by his controversial status seemed to deepen his connection to the experience he claimed to have had. In quiet moments, he would speak about the technology he had witnessed with a mixture of awe and frustration, describing capabilities that could revolutionize human civilization if they were properly understood and developed. The gap between what he claimed to know and what he could prove became a source of permanent frustration. Long-term, supporters noted changes in Lazar's demeanor as the years passed. The enthusiasm and sense of mission that had driven his initial revelations gradually gave way to resignation and weariness. He seemed to carry the weight of knowledge that he couldn't adequately share or validate, a burden that grew heavier rather than lighter with time. Chapter 8: The Enduring Mystery. As decades passed since Robert Lazar's initial revelations, his story evolved from breaking news into enduring legend. The immediate controversy faded, but the questions he had raised continued to resonate through popular culture, scientific speculation, and government policy. His account became a reference point for UFO researchers, and a cautionary tale for scientists considering public disclosure of classified information, the emergence of official government acknowledgement of unidentified aerial phenomena in the 2010s and 2020s provided unexpected context for Lazar's claims. Video footage released by the US Navy showed objects displaying flight characteristics remarkably similar to those he had described decades earlier: instantaneous acceleration, impossible maneuvers, and apparent disregard for known physical limitations. Former military personnel and intelligence officials began speaking publicly about encounters with unexplained craft, lending credibility to claims that had previously been dismissed as fantasy. While these revelations didn't directly validate Lazar's specific testimony about S4, they created an atmosphere in which his assertions seemed less impossible and more worthy of serious consideration. The scientific community's approach to his claims also evolved subtly over time. While mainstream physicists continued to reject his specific assertions about gravity manipulation and element 115, some researchers began exploring related concepts through legitimate theoretical frameworks. Projects investigating exotic propulsion systems and space-time engineering gained funding and academic respectability, suggesting that some of Lazar's ideas might not be completely impossible. Element 115's synthesis and official recognition in 2003 represented a partial vindication of Lazar's claims. Even though the created isotopes proved unstable rather than the stable fuel he had described, the mere existence of the element, decades after his testimony, demonstrated that some aspects of his story were grounded in genuine physics rather than pure imagination. Independent researchers continued to investigate claims related to S4 and related facilities. Satellite imagery of the areas Lazar had described showed construction and modifications consistent with covert operations, though nothing definitively proving the existence of alien technology storage. The circumstantial evidence remained intriguing without being conclusive. Lazar himself remained largely absent from the renewed public interest in UFO phenomena. While other figures from the disclosure movement embraced media attention and speaking opportunities, he continued to maintain a low profile, rarely granting interviews and avoiding public appearances. This reluctance to capitalize on vindication struck many observers as inconsistent with the behavior expected from someone who had fabricated his story for attention or profit. When he did speak publicly, usually at the urging of documentary filmmakers or persistent journalists, Lazar's testimony remained essentially unchanged. He added no new details, modified no previous claims, and showed no interest in updating his account to accommodate new information or address old criticisms. This consistency was interpreted as evidence of either remarkable truthfulness or well-rehearsed deception, depending on the observer's predispositions. The cultural impact of his story extended far beyond UFO research communities. Area 51 became a fixture in popular entertainment, inspiring countless movies, television shows, books, and video games. The facility's association with alien technology, largely created by Lazar's testimony, generated tourism, revenue, and cultural cachet that persisted long after the initial controversy had faded. Academic researchers began studying the Lazar phenomenon as an example of how extraordinary claims spread through society and persist despite lack of definitive proof. Sociologists, psychologists, and media scholars analyzed the story's endurance and cultural significance, often focusing more on its social impact than its literal truthfulness. Chapter 9: The Weight of Testimony in His Later Years. Robert Lazar bore the accumulated weight of decades spent defending an extraordinary claim that could neither be fully proven nor completely debunked. The energetic physicist who had first appeared on television had evolved into a more contemplative figure, shaped by years of scrutiny, skepticism, and the isolation that comes with maintaining an impossible truth. His daily routines had settled into patterns designed to minimize attention and maximize privacy. The scientific supply business provided structure and purpose, while keeping him connected to the world of legitimate research that had once been his professional home. Customers who recognized his name were treated politely but discouraged from lengthy discussions about UFOs or government conspiracies. The physical evidence he claimed to have taken from S4 remained tantalizingly out of reach. Lazar had mentioned possessing a small sample of element 115, but it had allegedly been confiscated during one of the government raids on his property. Without this physical proof, his claims remained dependent on testimony alone, vulnerable to questions about memory, motivation, and veracity. Family life had stabilized around the reality of living with a controversial public figure. His wife Joy had learned to navigate the peculiar challenges of being married to someone whose past included claims that most people found either fascinating or ridiculous. They developed strategies for maintaining normalcy while acknowledging that complete privacy would never be possible. Occasional documentary projects and interviews provided opportunities for Lazar to revisit his story, but these appearances seemed to drain rather than energize him. The questions remained the same, his answers unchanged, and the fundamental inability to provide definitive proof continued to frustrate both interviewer and subject. The circular nature of these conversations reflected the broader stalemate surrounding his claims. Health concerns began to occupy more of his attention as he aged, though he rarely discussed these issues publicly. The stress of decades spent defending controversial claims had taken a physical toll, manifesting in ways that friends and associates noticed but rarely mentioned. The burden of carrying an impossible secret seemed to be wearing him down, gradually but inexorably. Despite these challenges, Lazar maintained an active interest in scientific developments that might relate to his experiences at S4. He followed research into exotic propulsion systems, gravitational manipulation, and theoretical physics with the attention of someone hoping to see his claims eventually validated through independent discovery. These developments never quite reached the level of confirmation he sought, but they provided enough encouragement to sustain his belief in eventual vindication. Private conversations with trusted friends revealed glimpses of the man behind the public controversy. Away from cameras and recording equipment, Lazar could be reflective about the choices that had shaped his life and the consequences that continued to unfold decades later. He expressed no regret about revealing what he claimed to have witnessed, but acknowledged the personal cost of that decision. The isolation imposed by his controversial status had deepened his appreciation for simple pleasures and genuine relationships. The few people who knew him well, rather than knowing his reputation, provided stability and grounding that helped him maintain perspective on both his claims and their reception by the broader world. Legacy questions began to occupy more of his thinking as he aged. What would be the ultimate judgment of his story? Would future technological developments validate his claims, or would he be remembered as an elaborate hoaxer who managed to deceive millions of people for decades? These questions had no immediate answers, but they added philosophical weight to his already complex situation. Chapter 10. The silence between words as ears. The years accumulated around Robert Lazar's extraordinary claim. Something subtle but profound began to shift in how the world received his testimony. The desperate need to prove or disprove his story gradually gave way to a different kind of attention. One focused less on verification and more on the mystery itself. The man who had once been either prophet or fraud in the public imagination became something more complex. a living question mark, a reminder of how much humanity still didn't understand about its place in the universe. His story persisted not because it had been proven true, but because it had never been definitively proven false, creating a space for possibility that seemed to expand rather than contract with time. New generations discovered his account through internet videos, podcasts, and documentary films, approaching it without the baggage of the original controversy. These younger audiences often focused less on Lazar's credentials and more on the technical accuracy of his descriptions, finding correlations between his 1989 testimony and subsequent developments in theoretical physics that their elders had missed. The scientific concepts he had introduced, gravity manipulation, stable, super-heavy elements, space-time distortion, had moved from the realm of pure fantasy into legitimate areas of research inquiry, while no breakthrough had validated his specific claims. The boundaries of possibility had shifted enough to make his assertions seem less impossible and more intriguing. Government acknowledgement of unidentified aerial phenomena provided additional context that made Lazar's story seem less isolated and more part of a broader pattern. Official admissions that unexplained craft had been observed and studied lent credibility to claims that such activities might have been ongoing for decades, hidden in classified programs that few people knew existed. Lazar himself seemed increasingly detached from the ongoing debate about his veracity. In rare public appearances, he displayed the demeanor of someone who had long since made peace with being disbelieved, finding validation in consistency rather than acceptance. His willingness to let the story stand on its own merits, without embellishment or modification, struck many observers as either remarkably honest or remarkably well-disciplined. The technical accuracy of some of his predictions continued to impress even skeptical observers. Details about biometric scanners, element synthesis, and propulsion concepts that had seemed impossible in 1989 appeared increasingly prescient as technology and scientific understanding advanced. Whether this represented genuine insider knowledge or extraordinary intuition remained unclear, but it kept his story alive in serious discussions about the boundaries of human knowledge. Private investigators and researchers who had spent years trying to debunk his claims found themselves in the peculiar position of being unable to